Welcome to Beyond Belief. This 6-week session will focus on an essay by Paul Ricœur, the volume Conflict of Interpretations, called Religion, Atheism, and Faith. We will be distributing a copy, a PDF of the essay in the next couple of days or so you'll be able to read along if you want to. The lectures will be a more general overview on the themes that Ricœur discusses as an entry point into why postmodern theology matters. Some of the thinking behind it, its difference from the ordinary practice of religion, what happens in terms of its relationship with the secular, and how those things alter. Before I get into the just really first page of Ricœur, which is what I'll focus on today, I wanted to give a little bit of background on the life of Paul Ricœur, which is fairly interesting. He was born in 1913. His father was a professor of English. His mother died when he was only 7 years old, and so he was raised with his sister by his father. In World War I, his father was conscripted and mobilized for the war, and the children were sent to live with his grandparents. And the father was killed in 1915. They were orphaned and raised by the University of Evanston. The grandparents were devout Protestants, so he was raised in a traditional conservative space, going to church, reading the Bible, things like that, in that Protestant environment. He was a great student, went to the university where he studied Latin, Greek, and philosophy. In 1935, he got married, took a job teaching philosophy, did his obligatory military service for the French Army, which brings us up to World War II, where he was sent off to fight in the Maginot Line. He was taken prisoner by the Germans on the 10th of May, and sent to, or on June 7th, he was captured as a POW. He started service on the 10th of May, and sent to a POW camp in Pomerania, which is the northernmost point of Germany, in Prussia, which had been claimed by Sweden. The Germans did permit their students to read, though, so he got into some German, and started reading Husserl, Jaspers, others, and began outlining his first book. This is how Ricœur spent his time in the POW camp. And then after that, he was liberated by the Canadians in the last days and returned to Paris the 9th of May of 1945. He lived after the war in a little village, in a stronghold of the Protestant resistance. He had some kids, ended up being called into the Sorbonne to teach the history of philosophy in Paris. Started publishing books. In 1960, some of his best books came out: Fallible Man, Symbolism of Evil, things for which he is widely regarded. He was investigated for his political views, though, due to his writing, and ended up coming to America to teach at the University of Chicago, and ended up spending the rest of his life split between the University of Chicago and Paris. He is the most brilliant, least well-read human being that I've heard of in the 20th century. His writings are complicated, they're dense, but they're very, very generous. As a reader of philosophy and as a writer, he's incredibly able to understand the points of view expressed by others, and it makes him very difficult, but very informative to be able to read. In his introduction, so that's just his biography. In terms of Ricœur's relationship with religion specifically, Mark Wallace, who's collected a series of his essays on religion, argues that Ricœur's work with religion begins with his book, The Symbolism of Evil, which began as a way of relating philosophy and religion. Those are two disciplines, though, that he never ever integrated into something that he would call theology. In practice, he considered himself a Christian. In training, he considered himself a philosopher. And even though he would engage with theological issues and theological questions, he never ever claimed to do theology. He kept those two things very, very separate throughout his life. His work with Freud, which was introduced in his book, Freud and Philosophy, caused him to lose his faith in the ability of the will to restore the subject. Until his encounter with Freud, he had a hearty respect for the will of each individual to do good. After reading Freud, he lost his faith in that. And so he started to redefine faith as what emerges after a sustained stance of suspicion. This means three things for Ricœur, and again, this is according to Wallace. Number one, the use of suspicion as a mode of interpretation equally implicates both believers and critics, undermining their respective grounds. So what a lot of critics of religion fail to keep in account, if you have religion, and you have atheists, and you can see this today in the case of the new atheists, like Dawkins or Harris or people like that. They think that they have a realm of scrutiny that negates religion, but allows their own stance to remain unpreserved. And the unthoughtness of how critique undermines their own presuppositions can be clearly seen in Dawkins or Harris, right? They have a faith in science that goes untouched, and they're able to critique religion from their perspective without allowing that same critique to reflect back on their own thinking. From Ricœur's perspective, a truly skeptical position gets rid of all those kinds of foundations. You can't critique without embracing that mode of critique for yourself. Does that make sense? So that's his first point. The second thing that he talks about are metaphors. For Ricœur, metaphors help the imagination pursue and articulate the function of faith. Because faith is often enmeshed in the ineffable, and the unspeakable, and the unknowable, it's hard to know those kinds of things, right? We can gesture toward them, but the only way to really gesture toward them is through the use of metaphor. So for Ricœur, metaphor and the imagination are necessary in order to have something like a faith. He talks about, so here's an example. You can have death, and you can have God. And usually, those two things aren't brought together, right? Death is not considered a god outside of the Greek pantheon, for example, right? But if you integrate these into a metaphor and start talking about the death of God, suddenly the imagination has something new to think about. Does that make sense? And that's one reason why Ricœur keeps returning to myth, to stories and things like that, is kind of the groundwork of his thinking. Rather than have a universal, quote-unquote, objective starting point for his thought, he will oftentimes enmesh himself in a particular myth, which propels the imagination forward. The third thing that he talks about, and this goes into his later work on narrative theory in particular, is how interactions with literature offer readers expanded senses of both the world and themselves. So he becomes very, very attuned to the power of literature to open up new worlds for readers, for thinkers, that change the reader, change their conception of the world outside the text, and change how they engage within the text also. And so those are the three kinds of things that affect how he relates with religion, quote-unquote, traditionally understood. And that's a tradition, again, that he grew up on and took very, very seriously. So in sum, for Ricœur, even non-religious texts can offer revelations. A revelation isn't a revelation because it's God-breathed, as certain scriptural texts are claimed to be, but because they introduce an alien world into the reader's existence. And that performs the context of a revelation. It creates a clash that invites readers to a new understanding of truth. And it has to be new because it's in confrontation with an alien world that it's able to emerge. Ricœur's writings show respect both for the value of accepting the truth of revealed belief, which he has, but also the need for rational, critical scrutiny. And he holds those things in tension throughout his life, both personally and in terms of his profession as a scholar. His thinking and writing, therefore, oscillates between two poles, the pole of critique and the pole of conviction. Right? A conviction is the assurance that you have some idea of what the truth is, whereas critique is the mode that lets you be suspicious that the truth is what you have actually attained. And rather than pausing only here, or only here, both of which he finds to be erroneous, and hubris in some ways, right? If you have conviction without critique, you're going to be too proud. You're going to own the truth in a way that will let you use it as a weapon against others. If you have only critique without any conviction at all, you're a sophist, right? It's just empty blather. There's nothing that you're rooted in or nothing that you'll engage with personally. And so rather than go in one or the other, or even rather than kind of staking out a central position right here, which probably will sneak into the realm of conviction without you knowing it, right? Like, oh, I have the actual, like, the golden mean between these. No, you don't. You know, for Ricœur, it's really a dialectical oscillation that moves from conviction to a sudden realization that you're lacking some important part of the truth, to an understanding that, oh, this is really what that is. I have a deeper understanding. No, I'm still engaged in critiquing it, and here's what's lacking. And it's always a continual movement. There's nothing static about the human life. Dynamically, we push ourselves into existence, and we have to live dynamically, otherwise be frozen out into something that looks like the living death. Does that make sense? Okay. So, that's a little background on Ricœur Any questions about that part? Super interesting guy. All right, now let's get to the essay. The main thing that I wanted to do in today's class is really just outline how Ricœur defines the key terms of his text: religion, atheism, and faith. He does this again in the first couple pages of the book, and so I'm just going to walk through some of the context behind why he comes to those definitions, and that'll be tonight's class. I'm going to start with religion. He starts out his essay by arguing that he considers himself a Christian. Again, that's the point of conviction. He has an identity that's predicated in Christianity in a very important and personal way. But he considers himself a Christian in spite of the atheisms of Nietzsche and Freud. Nietzsche and Freud are both very, very influential, prominent thinkers in his work. He's engaged with them deeply. Heidegger's another big influence in his work who comes in later in the essay. But for him, there's a conviction that he's a Christian. That's there. But it's that statement of conviction is performed in the context of critiques that he'll later discuss. Number two, he defines religion with assertions that he clarifies afterwards in the light of atheism. But his initial claim about religion is that it offers two main aspects. There's the aspect of taboo, and there's the aspect of refuge. And a lot of this, moving outside of Ricœur for just a second, comes with an understanding of the sacred. The SACR prefix of the sacred, sacrifice, things like that, means to set apart, or to cut off, to sever, right? And for religion, what religion does really, really well is it separates, it consecrates certain areas as a refuge, and it leaves an outside that's taboo. And it performs those kinds of distinctions, and this is what a lot of sociologists of religion will talk about, in order to create a closer-knit sense of community. If you have certain things that are taboo in certain places of refuge, you're going to know the people who belong in the refuge based on what the taboos that they agree with. Right? If people do that which is taboo, they don't get the refuge. Does that make sense? So for him, the basic heart of religion is to provide a refuge contextualized by that which is taboo. And if you can think through whatever knowledge of religion you have, that's a lot of what goes on, right? There are a series of rules, there are a series of edicts, behaviors, rituals, things like that that will set apart a refuge that's clean from the taboo world, which is unclean. Okay? The second thing that he talks about, based on these main aspects of religion, are the two main feelings of religion. The first feeling that he talks about is the fear of punishment. And the second feeling that he talks about is the desire for protection. And again, both of those I think are very deeply rooted in the human condition. The world is an unsafe and dangerous place. It makes sense that there's a desire for protection. Nowadays it's easy to look for that desire for protection to come from the government. If you don't like the government, you can go to the insurance companies. If you don't like the insurance companies, you can go to the church. If you don't like the church, you can go somewhere else, I guess. Then you can start collecting your own gun stockpile and canned tomatoes in the basement with that hungered out. But there's a desire for protection. There's a desire for safety and security. And it's a religious impulse. Or it's an impulse that's taken up by religion and harnessed and used and fuels religion and fuels those who are part of or participate in a religious community. The other aspect is the fear of punishment. And a lot of the fear of punishment comes from an acknowledgement of what he'll talk in Fallible Man as fallibility. As humans, we're prone to screwing up. We don't do things well. We err. Our will outstrips our abilities. We make mistakes. And those mistakes, there's always that waiting for the shoe to drop of the consequence of the mistake. And that fear of punishment again, goes part and parcel, I think, with the sense of what's taboo, right? If we know what we can avoid doing, that gives us some control over escaping punishment. Nobody wants to be punished for what they didn't know. The more things that are listed as taboo give us more things that we can know are wrong, and more ways, therefore, that we can avoid punishment. Make sense? So that's what he understands to be religion, per se. Those are the human functions, they're the human, very, very basic human feelings that religion grasps in order to sustain itself as a vibrant living entity. He says, quote, "I thus understand religion as a primitive structure of life, which must always be overcome by faith, which is grounded in the fear of punishment." Right? Religions can be very, very sophisticated, but they emerge very early in human history. There's something very primitive about religion, and it's those primitive desires for life, and safety, and comfort, community. And that's what anchors it. But for Ricœur, there's a second part of his sense of religion. In addition to being a primitive structure that has to be overcome, he believes that accusation and protection are, quote, the corrupt parts of religion that atheism is right to criticize. You know, rather than assuming faith or belief, again, has to wholesale embrace conviction against all odds, he's willing to look at religion as something that can have corrupt elements within it. And those corruptions need to be identified, and they need to be purged for something less corrupt to come about. Not everything that happens correctly the first time. You know, sometimes you need to have a critical stance to engage with it in order to own or perform or be something that goes beyond its most basic primitive structures. So that's the definition of religion. Does that make sense? All right. Let us go to atheism. Ricœur spends most of the essay talking about atheism and working through both Nietzsche and Freud and their different ways of scathing religion for its excesses, for the things that aren't necessary to actually pushing humans toward a more full, more fulfilling life. So the first thing he says about atheism is that, again, kind of in line with its title, Religion, Atheism, and Faith, he sees atheism as both a division and a link that connect religion and faith, right? Like the word "and" itself, every use of the word "and" both unites and separates the two things that it's meant to connect, right? If you have a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, the "and" informs you that peanut butter is not jelly, jelly is not peanut butter, but the "and" nonetheless brings those two separate things together. The "and" always divides as much as it connects. And atheism always divides religion from faith at the same time as it connects it. So what he's doing is setting up a model of atheism that works against what most people maybe are taught to think or most people intuitively understand. Most people think of atheism as just a direct negation of religion, right? Here's what religion says, and here's what atheism says, that undermines everything religion says, and it just gives a fat no to everything that's involved in religion. Problematically, there are a lot of prominent spokespeople for atheism who think of atheism in a very simplified, didactic way, right? And again, the new atheists, I think, are particularly pernicious examples of that, and just saying no to everything that religion holds up as possible, or viable, or imaginable, and objecting to everything wholesale. So instead of that kind of model where there's no dialectical movement, it's just a determinate negation that says no, atheism is a connection. It leads towards something else. And you can't get to faith without moving through atheism. It's temporally in line with itself. Most people start with those kinds of primitive human fears, right? People want to be protected, they want to have refuge, they want to be safe. They'll start with there, and they'll have to move through atheism to get to here. in some way, shape, or form. And you'll have to wait until faith is defined in order to see exactly what he means by faith then. But for him, atheism is part of the human movement towards something greater than what religion itself offers in life.